Welcome back to Module 3, and we want to take a moment, not too long much of your time, but we want to talk about cutover migration. This might be an option for some of you. I like this because it's fast, it's easy, for the right customer though. And like we had already talked about, Kamal and I, is that, a lot of times you're going to end up in hybrid, and a much better way for most companies is going to be a hybrid. But just in case, there is a cutover migration that might be good for you. So we're going to take a few minutes to take a look at it. Take a look at my overview here, how to prepare for the cutover migration, what this actually is and what it takes to get ready to use it, and then doing the cutover migration. And I have to say, Kamal, it's funny that we're going to talk about this cutover migration because, it is really like going, and you guys want to migrate? Okay, you're done.
Right, exactly. Yeah, cutover migration is, a cutover migration. You're on-prem today, and on the day of the cutover, you move to Office 365. Everybody, the whole organization, moves to Office 365 on the same day.
It amazes me how quick and easily this works, assuming that you did the right steps in the right order. So why might this be important for you? Take a look at the slide. It is fast. It is easy. You have to meet the client size requirements. Kamal had mentioned this earlier, right around a maximum of 2,000 mailboxes. If you're smaller than that, this might be a good fit for you, especially if you just want it to be over. A quick, easy migration. There is nothing that you have that needs to be a hybrid. In other words, like we had talked about a little bit earlier, maybe for compliancy, you had some people that needed to stay on premises. That's not the case. Everybody wants to be, and everybody will be in the cloud when we're done. And so, Kamal, preparing for this cutover, what kind of things do I need to start to do to get ready to get this job done so that on Sunday everybody is happy in the cloud and I can, take vacation, go to sleep, whatever?
Yeah, so there are a few requirements to make sure that the cutover migration actually works. The way the cutover migration works is using what we call the Outlook Anywhere type connectivity into your Exchange environment, right? So in order for the cutover migration to work successfully, you have to make sure that Outlook Anywhere is enabled in the environment, because the service or the migration service is actually going to use Outlook Anywhere to connect to on-premises environment and migrate the data.
Now, of course, most of you probably already have Outlook Anywhere enabled in like Exchange 2010, that kind of thing. But verify, make sure that is. Some companies may not be using that service, and that service definitely needs to be up and running. And what else should I do to plan for this? I need to have Outlook Anywhere ready to go.
You want to make sure that your domain is actually registered and validated in Office 365, your custom domain, because when you sign up, you're getting the your domain.onmicrosoft.com domain, but you want to make sure that you actually add your custom domain and validate it with an Office 365.
Now, we're going to do that addition validation. We're going to kind of show that when we get to the demo for hybrid, so you can watch that, but that's part of that process of making sure that your domain is ready to go as far as Office 365 is. Now, once it's ready to go, is that when we're ready to start to do the endpoint stuff, or?
Well, there are a couple of other things. Make sure that you test using the test connectivity website, so that you are able to actually connect using Outlook Anywhere. You also need to have a service account that you're going to configure as a part of this process. So as a part of your planning, make sure you have a service account that actually has the permissions to be able to read the data from the source mailboxes which are within your on-premises. One of the things also is, if you have you want to make sure that you disable before you start the migration for the user.
So the unified messaging, we want to kind of disable that before we actually kick off that migration.
Right, exactly.
So now, what's the endpoint? What's the end state? No. What's this endpoint thing that we need to deal with?
Right. So the endpoint is just a configuration object within your Office 365 tenant. What it is it's basically telling Office 365 a endpoint or a destination it has to go to get and move the mailbox data from your on-premises to Office 365. So it would be your Outlook Anywhere endpoint could be the same as your endpoint. Like, when you're on-prem, we say, hey, this is where you go for OVA, this is where you go for ActiveSync. You do the same thing here. You're actually configuring or telling Office 365, that is my endpoint. That's where I'm going to get my information from.
So it could be as simple as mail.contoso.com.
Right, exactly.
And it's what I've been using for my Outlook Anywhere, that kind of thing. So
Right.
it's not really some great confusing kind of. Now, is there a way that I can test this or verify?
Yep. So, before you actually start the migration of the mailboxes, we always recommend that you first actually create the endpoint so that you are able to test and validate. As a part of this configuration, it also is going to ask you for the service account, username, and the password, and going to store that information as a part of that endpoint so that you are able to, validate before you actually start the migration process. Now, when you can also use the migration batch, which you use to actually move the mailboxes, but the recommendation is create the endpoint first so that you are able to test and validate that the endpoint is actually working, and then start the migration process.
Now, once I've got the endpoint set up, I've validated that it's working, I'm getting ready to do this migration, I'm not going to sit there and be picking one mailbox at a time.
Right.
We're going to create this thing called a migration batch.
Right, exactly.
And I've got a slide for that if you guys want to take a look at the quick slide, but this is the migration batch.
Yeah, so the migration batches, as I said, all users are going to move to Office 365 one day, right? So the migration batch is a process where we're actually saying that, we are going to start the migration. And what happens is once you create the migration batch and once you kick off the migration batch, it's going to basically start synchronizing your on-premises data to Office 365. Once the initial sync is complete, it's going to do incremental syncs every 24 hours. Now, you have multiple options to create these migration batches. One, you can actually use the GUI that you have, or we also have PowerShell if you want to automate it, like a new migration batch, and you have to specify the endpoint that you created in the previous step.
So let me understand this. I'm going to run this migration batch. Now, what's going to happen to my users while this is running?
Yep. So the users that you have here on premises, they're still accessing their mailbox. They're still receiving their mail on premises at that point. Once you create the migration batch, the process will actually create user objects and mailboxes in Office 365 for all these users and start synchronizing their mail. Now, once you create the migration batch, the synchronization is complete. You want to make sure that you change your MX records from pointing to your on-premises environment to Office 365, so that
right.
And also you can indicate the users to start using their Office 365 mailboxes, because any mail that comes into the old mailbox will get sent to the Office 365 mailbox.
And so really it is a relatively straightforward process for this. I mean, we're going to run the batch, and then when it's all done, we're going to flip our MX records.
Yep, and then you just say, finish my batch. Basically that.
And that closes it off, right?
Right,
That's
exactly.
when we're not going to be syncing anymore.
Right.
So when everything's all done and the MX records have moved and everybody's happy.
Yep.
And because right now I'm still syncing. If I should get some mail in the on-premises one, then I complete that and
You're done.
Well, what the funny thing is that I've got a slide here to remind everybody on configuring their MX records. But the post-migration task, well, you tell it that you're done. And believe it or not, I think we're kind of almost done. Aren't we done?
Right, we are. Actually, one of the only
Wow.
thing one of the best practice we say is, make sure that the TTLs, when you're changing these MX records, are
Oh, yeah, good point.
are lower, because when the change happens, you want to make sure that the change happens immediately. So manage those TTLs appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like any other DNS change, and you've been this before with migrations. If you're going to modify your MX records, lower the TTL so it happens quickly enough. But thinking about this, we're going to set up this endpoint, not a hard thing to do. We're going to set up the service, not a hard thing to do. We're going to verify, test. We're going to create the batch, which is our users, automate with PowerShell, however you want to do it, kick it off, let everything get synchronized up. Users are still using their on-premises mailboxes and still synchronizing.
Right.
And then when we're done, we just say we're done. And
Yeah, that completes it. The other best practice that we also want to recommend is, the migration process actually uses this attribute called Windows email address. your SMTP address,
Yeah.
primary SMTP address. So you don't want to change the SMTP address when you are actually in the process of creating these badges, and because it may break that connection between the on-prem user and the Office 365.
So during the migration, don't make any other, don't be messing with the configuration of somebody's email address or something like that, because you don't want to break it. Well, you know what? This is really simple. And actually, for us, this is the cutover migration. I really like this process. Done it a few times. Love a cutover migration. Might be something that works for you. Remember, it takes everybody, and everybody's going to go. So if you meet the requirements for it and it seems to meet the needs that you have, this might be a way to go about getting onto the cloud quickly and easily and painlessly. But when we come back, we're going to do hybrid. And that's what most of you are going to be doing, is hybrid. Give you a lot of flexibility this way. So we're going to start the process of talking about hybrid, and then we'll do the demo.